This is Canon Fodder, episode 14. My guest this week is a YouTuber, essayist, film critic, as well as the purveyor of the Last Picture Show Film Festival, which you should all go out and purchase on Gumroad and listen to. Yours truly was a guest on there, as well as much smarter and better spoken people. Last things, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man, and it's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really glad to have you on. I I did not expect you to pick Tolstoy. Actually, I expected because you did a live stream with, I think it was Lomez and Dan Baltic on the male narcissists, or the writing narcissists of the
boomers.
70s. Yeah. That's it. The boomer narcissists. And I was expecting Updike. I was expecting Mailer. Actually, would have been interesting because he kind of blurs the line between fiction and nonfiction. And who was the third one? Roth.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to do Roth with our friend Isaac Simpson of the Carousel podcast.
Oh man, that will be fantastic.
Yeah.
He'd be a great guy to talk about Roth with.
I thought strictly American. I did not suspect you to be a Russia boo.
I've never heard that phrase before. That's fantastic.
Fine, yeah, Russophile. How about that?
A Russophile, yeah. No, I caught the Russian lit bug when I was an undergraduate way back in the day. Read this stuff alongside a lot of Philip Roth and those great male narcissists. But no, you gotta stick with the greats. And honestly, part of why I wanted to talk about this book is, I think, probably the novel that is nearest and dearest to my heart. I always try and reread it every couple of years, but I've also set a task for myself, Hudson, in this episode, which is I am going to put an end to the Dostoevsky simping that goes on in these circles. I understand. I know. I'm well aware that you and Prudentialist did like 2-hour episodes on the brothers Karamazov. Dostoevsky gets a ton of clout. He's like the go-to author of the dissident right. For whatever reason, he's become our literary patron saint. And I'm here to say I am a Tolstoyan, and I am proud. I want you to picture for a minute. Let's do this. Just picture the Virgin Chad meme. All right, we've got the Virgin Dostoevsky, exiled to Siberia, degenerate gambler. Kind of just a poor wretch,
He's got,
and then you've got the Chad Tolstoy, beautiful estate, Yasnia Polyana, right? Landed aristocrat, it's the meme makes itself. I'm too lazy to have generated the meme, but
and it's funny because Dostoevsky also had epilepsy. Right, so you could say that he is physically weaker than Tolstoy, who is sort of this Chad that lived almost up to the Russian Revolution, actually.
Yes.
I think he died in 1910, 1911, something like that.
Yep, right around there, yeah.
Yeah,
and in all seriousness, I don't I also hold Dostoevsky in esteem, but I am genuinely, authentically surprised that I think in some ways Tolstoy has more valence for our time and particularly our space. And I am kind of caught off guard that I never hear people talk about Tolstoy, and yet you hear Dostoevsky all the time. So my hope is that today, we allow him to enter the discourse, and he gains a little bit of prestige and attention.
So I have an answer for you, right? My understanding of Tolstoy, and maybe you'll educate me and my audience a bit here. My understanding of Tolstoy is, yes, he was a landed aristocrat. Yes, he was, he grew up in the Tsardom, so very monarchical, very rigid class structure. But he wasn't for the Tsar. Because he was an aristocrat, he was allowed a lot more leniency than a man like Dostoevsky, who, when he spoke out against the Tsar, he was about to be shot, whereas, Count Leo Tolstoy is seen as sort of a quirky figure in the aristocracy, more or less. Tolstoy has some very strange political views. I remember reading in college his essay on why you need to be vegetarian. He's he's an aristocrat for the working man, let's say, and there's always something that comes off as self-hating about that. I wonder what your thoughts are there. Oh, also, and then you read War and Peace, and he's just so anti-great man theory of history that it's like, he's not our guy at all.
I mean, I think those are all perfectly fair points. I honestly don't know that much about his politics and whether they aligned with Dostoevsky's or not, but I do believe that he was probably given a bit of lenience, both for being a member of the gentry and just kind of this quirky mystic. I doubt they saw him as any real threat, and I think he was probably beloved enough that he could probably avoid that kind of trouble. It's an interesting point you bring up about his attitude towards the great man. I guess the reason why I think he's relevant for our space is, in particularly, not so much War and Peace, but Anna Karenina. And I don't want to make this too simplistic or spell it out, within the first 10 minutes of this conversation. But I think that Anna Karenina presents this. I believe the literary term for this, I looked it up earlier today, is chiasmus, right?
Yes, the cross.
A cross. And when that's deployed within literature, it's sort of talking about these two characters whose paths intersect. And typically this is a character, I think Jay Burden used the example because his namesake is a example of a chiasmus in what book is that? Jay Burden.
Yeah, Robert Penn
Warren.
Yeah, that's all the President's Men, but
all the King's Men.
Yeah, all the
right.
King's
Yes,
Men.
all the King's Men.
Shout out Jay Burden.
Yeah, so it's people can probably think of a lot of examples either in film or literature of a chiasmus, but it's essentially one character who is descending, or sort of things are getting kind of worse. There's a tragic trajectory, and another character who is kind of rising up, and at some point in the story, their paths sort of intersect. So you have these two protagonists, and they're obviously set up as foils for one another. And I think Anna Karenina is, I think it is the ultimate, the quintessential literary chiasmus. Although not a lot of people know about that, unfortunately. And what it's showing in its chiasmus is a pronomian life and an antinomian life. And we can, we can kind of unpack that, Hudson, but I might be getting into the weeds here.
Yes, pretend you're speaking to a small child, and I don't exactly know what pro and antinomian mean.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Well, I guess let me just start with laying down some kind of basic fundamentals about the book Anna Karenina. It's a real tragedy, because I guess with most like Jane Austen adaptations, what happens is you kind of take a Jane Austen heroine, a protagonist, and she gets turned and molded into a 20th century feminist who is nothing whatsoever related to Jane Austen's invention.
That's very. I'm sorry to interrupt. I read Jane Eyre for the first time by Charlotte Bronte. Love that book, by the way. Highly recommend it. And that goes through. It was a Penguin version of the book, so I would go through the footnotes and the introduction, and it's exactly as you say. The book is about God, but they make it about the God of feminism. It's horrific, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean this unfortunately happens to any and every 19th century woman writer, which is a shame. But the way that Anna Karenina gets maligned and misrepresented is more of a lie of omission than a lie of revision, which is quite simply they they delete the chiasmus. They remove the chiasmus because there are two protagonists.
Hmm.
Most people that haven't read Anna Karenina don't realize this, but
Right.
there's the character of Anna and there's the character of Levin.
Right.
And Levin is essentially a proxy for Tolstoy. He's this, again, landed aristocrat. This is kind of occurring when most of the aristocracy of Russia, they live in Moscow. They're very kind of drawn towards Europe and particularly the sort of French court or the French fashions of Europe. They kind of try to play down their Russian identity. If they have land and serfs and estates out in the country, they sort of seldom visit them in favor of this kind of cosmopolitanism. And Anna is set up as a character who's very much part of this world. And of course, as everybody knows, the story is, she's married to an older man. She's dissatisfied in her marriage. She meets the dashing Vronsky, who's an officer in the military. She has an affair, which essentially causes her expulsion from polite society and her complete and total undoing. Spoilers, that this ends in her death. And so Anna is really the antinomian aspect of this story, and nomos is this word. Not a lot. Some people will be familiar with it, but nomos is basically sort of the idea of bonds, that which holds people together, a society together, oaths that are taken and kept. So oftentimes people with more of a more literary pretense in this space will describe the antinomian left and the pronomian right. We
Yeah,
are
I've heard
people
the
that are.
distributist use that terminology a lot, and it's funny. I'll look it up every time he uses it, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's what that means," and then I'll forget it because I'm a midwit.
Yeah, and well, no, it's also it's one of those Greek words where there's no perfect translation because it's somewhere between law and duty and bond, but
Mm.
tradition, the maintaining of tradition, um, seeing to your duties, fulfilling your oaths. These could all be seen as things that are pronomian. Whereas, I mean, and I think antinomian also kind of gets used quite often as a synonym for entropy, the
Mm.
entropy of the left.
Mm.
And so Anna, obviously, it's probably pretty apparent, is somebody who is falling away from her Russian identity. She's, like most of the aristocrats in her day, just enamored of Europe. What's also very interesting is that she's always painted and described as this avid reader. She's got
Hmm.
this very kind of rich fantasy life, which I think, funny enough, that Tolstoy's a novelist. He kind of paints kind of like how Plato says we have to kill the poets, or Socrates says that through Plato. There's this aspect of Tolstoy that feels very skeptical about readers of fiction.
So
Um,
what else? So, and I want to just add this one quick thing before I let you go on. The real tragedy for me in Anna Karenina is, and I expected completely to not feel this way. I fell in love with the character, right?
yes,
Anna is noble in like not just in by birth, but in spirit, right? She is introduced in the plot because her brother has had an affair, right? Her brother was sleeping with the governess, probably other affairs as well, and her sister-in-law is looking to divorce him, right? She feels so betrayed, she feels so hurt, and it's actually because of Anna's intervention that they're able to reconcile, right? So this is a pro-family woman. This is a godly woman. Her She leaves her young son in St. Petersburg, which we'll get to the Petersburg Moscow sort of divide in a little bit, but she leaves her own family to mend her brother's family for him, right? So she does not intend to cheat on her husband, right? To ruin her family, to follow her passions, and it's done in such a way that she's the whole first part of the book she is trying to resist Vronsky, right? But there's this instant immediate attraction between both of them, and no matter how pure her intentions, like every tragic hero, she falls, right? And that's what's so beautiful about the book, because it's not I was expecting to be like, yeah, man, modernity, women suck, hypergamy, stuff like that, and it's not applicable whatsoever here. Uh, in, Tolstoy wrote A Beautiful Woman, and that alone is an accomplishment, because I write fiction here and there, and I don't mean to compare myself to probably one of the, like, if not the greatest, then definitely top 10 all time greatest novelists, right?
Mm.
And the reason that he's top 10 is because he can write women so well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Hudson, and that is something I want to bring up, because in laying out this juxtaposition that Tolstoy gives us between Anna and Levin, it's very important to note that it is not a cynical or a kind of unsympathetic portrait of Anna. And if people were starting to get that impression, my apologies. It's not like he's like, look at Levin, the trad proxy for me,
Oh,
the
definitely.
awesome Leo
It,
Tolstoy.
it was more because this is my first reading of it, and I just knew the book by reputation. So
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
getting a facsimile of what the story was. I got the, let's say, the Sparks Notes version of events, and even that's not charitable enough.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I often just kind of lament. I wish he'd, given it another title, something that would allow Levin to kind of live on in just kind of popular mythology and understanding of the book. But I guess to finish my point about adaptations. So if you have the Brontes, if you have Austen, you just have to kind of warp and deform the heroine of the story. Whereas what happens with Anna Karenina adaptations is you just completely and entirely remove Levin, and then there's no there's just no foil to the story, and you lose half the story. And I suppose there's a bit of an argument that movies are short; it would be impossible to fit both storylines into this, but they do take up, practically speaking, about the same amount of time, and they're definitely sort of the main characters in that they are whom the narrator kind of focuses on. But very strangely, they never really encounter one another in the
Mm.
book. They they come into these moments where they almost meet, or they have a friend who knows them both,
Right.
and you're kind of waiting and anticipating for these two characters to somehow come into one another's lives, because they're moving in the same circles. The Kitty, the woman who Levin marries, was somebody that Vronsky was courting and sort of abandoned to pursue Anna. But
Anna's
they are never really brought into the same space.
Right. Anna's brother is Levin's friend,
Yes.
and Anna's brother's wife is Kitty's sister.
Right, right. Yeah, it's complicated to keep all the family trees.
Yes. There's
Especially because Russians have like 5 names.
right. The
If they're
patronyms especially are difficult to keep up with. I just because I've read a lot of Dostoevsky and I have read War and Peace, I'm used to it.
Mm.
So I didn't need to make a map this time, but yeah, it's
Speaking of Tolstoy's portrait and Tolstoy's sympathy of Anna, and I think despite that being very compassionate and empathic and fair and painting a beautiful portrait, I do maintain that there is a certain kind of pronomian and antinomian and a moral dimension to the text. But I'd be curious what you think of this, Hudson. I've had Tolstoy's style, his particular literary style, and I think often he's sort of considered just, I don't know, probably one of the primary personalities that just gets associated with realism, like perhaps
Mm,
naturalism. He's the in broad strokes, he's just famous for painting these really just kind of elaborate, in-depth backstories. You get to know kind of the genealogy of the characters, things that impacted them early in life. When they make a decision or they perform an action, he's at pains to kind of explain all of these things that impacted the decision making. And I've heard his narrative voice be described as the God who loves you. There's
oh,
this
I
sort of
like that.
there's this strange benevolence to his writing, whether he's
Yes.
describing Anna's affair or Anna's eventual death or any character, regardless of how objectively wrong um, what it is they're doing. There is this kind of there's this just kind of, I don't know, divine forgiveness and empathy that is I thought that was just the best characterization I've heard of his prose. Is he writes like the God who loves you.
Yes, I really enjoy that, and I think that is both apt, and I'm gonna steal that forever now. So thank
Yeah,
you.
that's the best way I have of describing his stuff to people. Uh,
There's another novelist that I love, an American novelist named John Williams. Have you ever heard of him?
yeah, did he
S
write Stoner?
Yes, he did. Yes,
Stoner,
which
yeah.
is probably my favorite book, and that too is written so he is God. He is a God who loves you. The narrator of that book um,
Mm.
is a God that loves William Stoner, and that's so it's rare, unfortunately. You could probably put Tolstoy in the same category as sort of the other maxi novelists, let's say, like
Mm.
Wallace. And Wallace definitely doesn't love his characters, right? But Wallace is trying to achieve a similar thing later in a more cynical age.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you bring up Wallace. I could go on a whole tangent about Wallace. I mean,
I
he makes a lot of allusions to the brothers Karamazov in Infinite Jest.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the brothers are the brothers. Yeah.
Right.
Um, so,
And
right.
he has a really famous essay about not directly about Dostoevsky, but actually the that 4-volume quartet biography of Dostoevsky. I think he identified with himself much more as a kind of a disciple of Dostoevsky's. And
Mm,
funny enough, because I'm actually trying to write a piece on this at the moment called the Brothers X, because he had this kind of friendly rivalry with Jonathan Franzen, who
mhm.
you and I can talk about him if you want, but
I'd rather not.
yeah, me neither.
He's such a prick,
I got
and
well,
it.
he's a total prick, but and I've caught a lot of flack for making this comparison, comparing Franzen and DFW to Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. And the only thing I mean by that, people, don't don't write mean things in the comments, is that there
We don't
was
get comments here.
this kind of deliberate retreat by Franzen early in his career into a kind of formal realism. And I think he's somebody who very much attempts to ape that like maximal genealogical empathic
Mm,
style. The reason why he fails and the reason why he's a bad writer is because the only people he actually has empathy for are shitlibs.
right.
And his he always puts a bunch of like NPR, latte class people up against like red staters, and it's kind of the antithesis of what Tolstoy's perspective would have been if he was a contemporary of Franzen's. But I do think that those two more modern writers, Wallace and Franzen, are kind of interesting. It's interesting to consider them in the lens of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy.
I'd be really interested to read that essay, and it's
Well,
interesting.
You can edit it for me.
Oh,
Maybe give me your thoughts.
I would love to. Yes, send it along. That'd be a great pleasure. I want to get off. I want to get back to the book, but I can't let the meat's too red for me to not talk about Franzen and Wallace for a second.
Oh yeah,
because I did think that you were going to choose Wallace, because you also did an episode of your show with Astral, if I remember correctly.
Yes,
about Infinite Jest, and I think that Wallace was a better friend to Franzen than Franzen was to Wallace. Like, Wallace probably thought they were frenemies, whereas Franzen probably thought that they were just enemies. And it's interesting because actually Dostoevsky and Tolstoy never met.
They may have corresponded, but I know you're right. I don't think they ever met.
They
were aware of one another's work.
They were aware of each other, but they lived at the same time, but they didn't. I don't think they corresponded, and they definitely never met. It's one of those tragic what ifs. Like, a lot of people wonder.
It's another chiasmus. It's a chiasmus.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
The characters never encounter each other.
And it's the same thing with, like, especially Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, right? People are like, oh, if only they had met each other, if only they had, because they were writing about such similar things, like Zarathustra and the Underground Man are brother works, of similar minds. And it might even have been Jordan Peterson. That's how low I've sank to make to ape from at this point. But I think he said, somebody definitely said that Dostoevsky was a psychologist, but Tolstoy was a sociologist. Right. And
I like that. And that's interesting. The way that I've heard that exact same kind of notion phrased is that I've heard it described as Tolstoy is horizontal and Dostoevsky is vertical. And I think what people mean by that is there's this kind of temporal, what I've described as this genealogical nature to his prose, where he's traveling through time in this kind of linear manner, whereas Dostoevsky, you get this sort of straight down nosedive into the, like, inner psyche of some schizophrenic.
Right.
It's much more claustrophobic to read Dostoevsky, and it's very expansive to read Tolstoy.
Crime and Punishment was originally just a story about a drunk and his family, and then it unwound into Crime and Punishment. But you learn a lot about that drunk and his family.
Yes.
Whereas Anna Karenina is, let's say, just the way that people come in and out of each other's lives. And I think more so War and Peace, because it also takes place across a greater span of time and has a larger cast of characters. Anna Karenina has a lot of people too, but it's more insulated between, like, 3 or 4 families, right?
Yeah.
Whereas War and Peace is just, like, everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Even his shorter stuff, like Haji Marat, has that, which is probably my favorite piece of Russian literature.
I have this is another tangent. We might as well get the tangent.
Go ahead. Yeah, do your thing, man.
But this story might just be apocryphal, but it's another one I've heard, and it's about Turgenev, who's maybe like the number 3 greatest Russian novelist, like 19th century.
Right.
He deserves more credit than he gets.
He's the father of Russian literature. Like, there is no Dostoevsky or Tolstoy without Turgenev.
I hope I'm thinking about the right guy, because he was a contemporary of Tolstoy's, if I recall, right? I might be thinking about Lermontov. Wait, let me Google this.
I think Turgenev was a little before both of them.
Lermontov. No, I'm not thinking of Lermontov. I'm thinking of, wait, pardon my typing.
Go ahead, man. I might be wrong. I'm copying what a professor.
No, I think I am thinking of Lermontov. But let's say this is Lermontov. He wrote A Hero of Our Time.
Yes.
He was visiting Tolstoy at his estate, and Tolstoy brought him into his stables to show him his horses. And as he was sort of just describing these different animals to him, and he would be like, this horse's father was bred from such and such a line, and blah blah blah. And he thought that this was Tolstoy's passive aggressive way of criticizing his fiction and teaching him how to provide like context and characterization. And he
really
like
funny.
he like stormed out of the stables and like left. like flew from the property because he thought Tolstoy was just judging him. I guess that's how much of a sense of inferiority this guy had faced with Tolstoy.
And I mean, A Hero of Our Time is really good, but it's not Tolstoy. Like he is. I'd probably put him at like number 5 in Russian lit, behind even Bulgakov, who I love. Anyway, that kind of and that apocryphal story reminds me of the scene that made me fall in love with Levin as a character. Kitty has, and we'll kind of get to this, but it's in the first part of the book as well. Kitty has said no to his marriage proposal. It's very clear that she is in love with Vronsky. So Levin is just dejected, and he makes the long journey back to his estate. And the only thing that cheers him up is that his cow has had a calf. And he is just over the moon about this calf. He thinks this calf is beautiful. He thinks that it's like the, because he's not an atheist. He's an agnostic, we'll say, right? So he doesn't like have this spark of the divine when he sees this calf, but he's such a naturalist and such a man of the land that he loves animals and livestock, and especially this calf, this newborn calf. And he's just thinking to himself, this would be great to share with someone. I wish I had someone to share this moment with. And that's when I was like, damn, all right, Levin, I'm with you, man. I am bought in.
Yeah, no, I think I was about to say, let's talk a little bit more about Levin as this I'm both foil for Anna and kind of proxy for Tolstoy. But I mean, he's probably the strangest character in the book, and he is this. I think it would be fair. This is again why I think it deserves more prestige in our space, is that I think it would be fair to describe Levin as a quintessential reactionary, even if he, is not fitting that term exactly politically at the time, because he is it's seemingly this one and only aristocrat in Russia who is sort of intent on remaining rural, and is kind of skeptical of modernity, of all of these kind of encroaching European trends. Like all of Levin's siblings have gone to the city. They very seldomly come home. Everybody has kind of fled the countryside. And he is really the only character that views all of these. And it's not just sort of, the modern fashions or European kind of social influences, or, atheistic kind of ideologies beginning to infiltrate into Russian society, but just kind of in a very Tolkien-like way, skeptical of technology. Like I'm sure at some point we're going to talk about the train.
Oh, we have to.
Levin just seems to have this instinctual repulsion at industrialized equipment, and he really is kind of isolated in a way that's for different reasons than Anna. He's isolated in his in the fact that he is somebody that is holding on to the past.
He's reactionary, and he's the definition. Identity. He's the definition of a reactionary.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because, again, like we said with the chiasmus, he doesn't start out that way. right? He's trying to modernize his farm, right? He's trying to get his serfs to work in a Western way. He's trying to bring new farming techniques to these Russian serfs and peasants who he has to hire out because there aren't enough men who want to work in his farm, right?
Yeah.
And he wants to bring everything up to snuff so that he can, get involved, let's say, with the commerce, the commerce boom that is at the end of the 19th century in Russia, right?
Mhm.
And it's his interaction with the peasants, with more common folk, and with the land of Russia itself that he's sort of he's brought away from that, right? Uh he's seduced by progress, let's say, and progress in a very like lowercase p kind of way, but even just improving a farm so that he can make more money, right? Like
Yeah.
very, very bare bones, right? He's obviously attracted to that. Who wouldn't be? But the land itself and also the people that take him away from that. Uh, and that's another thing where like he and Dostoevsky had so much in common. And I don't mean to. I know that you are the Tolstoy stan, and I keep bringing up uh
It's
his
fine. It's inevitable.
but I bring up Dostoevsky because when I was talking to Prudentialist about the brothers Karamazov, right, European influence was coming in the way of political freedom for the serfs, right, and European political ideas, especially socialism and communism, right. So Dostoevsky is reacting to those ideas from a Christian perspective, like a very orthodox Christian perspective, right? Tolstoy, meanwhile, is seeing the exact same thing play out in Russian society, and he's reacting from sort of this almost blood and soil Mother Russia perspective, right?
Mm.
He's taking it's a nationalistic before Russian nationalism was like really like a thing, right? Because he doesn't really care much for the czar. He doesn't care much for the aristocracy, but the fact that he lives in a place with these people on this land that he doesn't want to see changed because it
Yeah. Yeah.
works the way that it works. It works in a very Russian way.
He's sort of a populist,
A little bit, yeah,
like a
and that I think
passive populist.
yeah, I think you could describe Tolstoy as that, not just Levin, but yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and it can become very challenging to differentiate these characters. This parallels Tolstoy's life. He's somebody whose peers and generation fled their farms. In fact, the scene where the second time Levin proposes to Kitty and she accepts, they're playing a game that sort of it's kind of seems similar to like something like Scrabble, and
Right.
he starts kind of writing these messages to Kitty that she's decoding, and that's how he asks her to marry him once again. But that's actually how Tolstoy had asked his wife to marry him. So there are scenes like that are pulled directly out of his life, and Levin's property is clearly a portrait of Tolstoy's estate.
Right. So I want to talk about before we kind of get into it's funny because it's called Anna Karenina, but I'm just so infinitely more interested in Levin
Me too.
because it's a story that's like it's a story about a man's redemption rather than a woman's fall. Right.
Mm,
We're gentlemen on this podcast. We don't like to see women fall. Let's say.
that's right.
But um I want to talk about trains for a second because the train is the ultimate symbol of progress coming to Russia, right? And it's clear to Tolstoy. It's clear that Tolstoy does not see this he doesn't welcome the progress whatsoever, right?
Mm,
The novel opens with a death on the train tracks. This death is seen as a bad omen by Anna. It's right after she meets Vronsky for the first time. So if this was a movie, they would have their meet cute, and then
yeah.
right after a man has fallen on the tracks and died. You know, So right away we are keyed up to, okay, train means tragedy. Progress bad, train bad, Europe bad, right? Keep Russia for the Russians, and we'll by the end of this recording we'll be Duganists.
Yeah, by the end, what?
Oh, right. I mean, we're Dugan. I'm not going to say that because I actually haven't read Dugan at all. But yeah, so technological progress is, I mean, he's Leo Kaczynski almost.
Absolutely, yeah.
Especially, he's got the unkempt beard, and he lives out in the middle of nowhere. I don't think he ever mailed anybody anything bad, but I wouldn't be surprised. But yes, he's very much sort of, Levin especially is corrupted even by not just trains but by cities, right? There's an interesting throughout the novel, there's an interesting thing that Tolstoy does where anybody who goes to Moscow, and it's especially Moscow because Anna Karenina and Vronsky both live in St. Petersburg, but their attraction is lit in Moscow, right?
Right. It's like Chinatown.
Yeah, and it's funny because Moscow is the Russian capital, right? At this time, of course, though, Peter the Great had moved the king's court to St. Petersburg way before then. So at this point, the capital of Russia is St. Petersburg, right? And that is the European-facing city. That's the one that's built like right on the Arctic Circle. It's a beautiful city. I highly recommend, as soon as it's convenient for people to travel there, that they should. And it's built like a European city, whereas Moscow is built. I mean, the best way to put it is just it's a Russian city. It's very Russian. I don't have the words to describe it, but throughout Russian literature, and as I'm sure you know, especially at this time, the divide between Moscow and St. Petersburg, it's like this might as well be East versus West.
Right. And again, I think those are maybe in some ways symbols for Anna and Levin as characters. Anna being Moscow, Levin being St. Petersburg. In some sense, that's another just sort of there's this yin and yang that occurs throughout the book.
So anyway,
personified in these two characters, but it's also It's also a metaphor within the two cities, and a lot of other aspects of the book.
So back to the plot of the novel. I think we pretty much covered the first part. There's a ball that because Anna's in town, right? She gets invited to a ball because there's always some sort of social event going on for these people. And that's where she meets Vronsky, like, properly, right? They have a dance. Vronsky and Anna. Tolstoy does this really interesting thing where everything is told more or less from Kitty or Levin's perspective, because Kitty is just like, she's the debutante, right, of this ball. She is going to be betrothed to Vronsky, and everybody's super excited for her because it's such a good match, right? She comes from a good family. He comes from a good family. Levin is sort of like, Levin was the best friend of Kitty's brother who drowned, and he was just kind of this hanger-on kid. Imagine like kind of like a Steve Urkel, right? He's just always over the house.
Yeah.
And like he's not annoying, and he's friends with the family. He's always very polite, but he's seen as like sort of awkward. He's seen as not a good fit. He's a weirdo because he lives out in the middle of the woods. He doesn't do anything with society. What is Kitty going to do out there? What, our sensitive daughter is going to farm? I don't think so.
Yeah. He's the wallflower Wojak.
Yes. Yeah. He is a sensitive young man.
Yeah.
And Vronsky, it's a Chad virgin meme.
Yeah.
Actually. Anna, however, is just so intoxicating. She's so beautiful. She's everybody's favorite person in the room. and Vronsky is just taken with her, right? And because Vronsky knows what's up, he's going to propose to Kitty, right? But this siren song that Anna isn't even trying to give off, by the way, he's just so infinitely attracted to her that he forgets all about Kitty. She is left to sort of miss the big dance, right? She has to dance in order to save face. She has to dance with the like the host of the party, right? Because again, she's the debutante. She's like the big deal. The whole reason that this party is happening is so that people can watch Vronsky propose to her, more or less.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So the fact that all this has happened not only has just shattered her inside, and it'll actually manifest into an actual illness, but she was infatuated with Anna, right? Because everybody is, right? But she loves Anna, right? So the fact that the two people that she loves most have kind of betrayed her in this way just completely shatters her. And then, that's all the better for Levin to be able to stand outside her window with the boombox.
Yeah. Get her on the rebound. Yeah.
Which I mean, and to Tolstoy's credit, that's not how it happens at all. Levin is not portrayed as some sort of like simp or anything like that.
No.
Like I'm using our modern language to describe.
It's not.
It's a very bad comparison, but I'm trying to.
He's not beta. Levin is not beta.
No, not at all. Yeah.
It's just Kitty's kind of young and immature, and she doesn't have her kind of Guy Q calibrated quite yet.
No, of course, and she wouldn't. And also, one would be skeptical if she did. If she had any sort, and that's I've never heard that Guy Q. That's clever, but if she did have that, one would take that with skepticism that she was kind of she was impure, right. She was unchaste.
Right. It's crazy because he can go. Tolstoy can jump from like the mind of a 15-year-old debutante girl, and it's completely convincing, and then jump into the mind of like an 80-year-old Russian count, and back and forth, and it's just not skipping a beat, just not tripping, not fumbling his scales. That's just always mind-blowing how well he can do any type of human being. Sorry, I interrupted you, Hudson.
No, and please feel free to, because people can listen to me talk all the time. This is the only time I've had you on, so we're here to talk about you and your favorite book. So please go on.
I did want to also let's have a little sidebar about Vronsky, because I think this is again actually the best opportunity I have to give people kind of an example of like the God who loves you, or the benevolence of Tolstoy. And if people haven't read this yet, you're probably hearing us talk about Vronsky, you're probably picturing like Vlad Dracula, or like
but that's not totally unfounded, because he does have that edge to him.
Yes, no, and he's rakish. He's a womanizer. He is this kind of dangerous ne'er-do-well figure. But and I wish I had the actual passage of this book marked, but it's just something that like has stuck with me since the first time I read this book. There's one scene, I think it's during this period where like Anna and Vronsky's relationship is disintegrating. Like they just, they burned too hot for it to hold it together. And he lacks any kind of, domestic qualities. He's just completely, all he knows how to do is to seduce and to hunt women and to treat women like he's a soldier. He basically treats love like a battlefield, and once he's conquered the territory, he doesn't know what to do. And it would be very easy to just kind of paint him as, I don't know, like, I'm not picking on Jane Austen, but there's usually some like completely feckless man who's just the antagonist. But there's one moment where it's a moment where, like, Vronsky's just left on a, like, crying hysterically, and he, like, storms off or something, where you're like, oh, this is 110% our villain of the story. And Tolstoy goes on at like, he just starts to talk about the loyalty and the love that Vronsky has for his fellow soldiers, and how ultimately they were the only people that would ever be his family.
Mm.
Like, and it's like, that's the kind of Tolstoyan
he's not a
beauty of,
mustache
like,
swirling villain.
it's like, you're supposed to say, like, that piece of shit Vronsky then, like, went out and, like, like, I don't know, howled at the moon and drank someone's blood. But instead, he was like, he picks the most tender aspect of his personality, and describes that to you, rather than describing the fact that he's breaking this woman,
right.
and in some way explaining to you why he could never have done otherwise, because of this love he has for his fellow soldiers, and, like, they're really the only people he kind of knows how to coexist with.
So
It's never a he's never on the attack with any of these characters, even when these characters are attacking his protagonists. It's this pacifism. It's this kind of linguistic pacifism that is, I've never read anything else like it.
Yeah, there's no judgment from Tolstoy, right? And in fact, I would say that he's almost trying to cover for all of these people.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, no, they're not so bad because X, Y, and Z. He's like this. He really is a god that loves in this case, because he's trying to give you a peek.
He's convincing the reader that you need to forgive this person.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's probably why the book is as beloved as it is, because, well, one, at the very end, of course, we get two very different endings for our protagonists, but the end of the novel is one of redemption. And I think that's the ultimate message of the whole thing. I did really like what you said about Vronsky as pursuer of women, and kind of making that comparison with his life as a soldier, because he's not just a soldier, and he's not just in the army. He's a cavalry officer, right? So his job, he can't hold land. He can't be a domestic. He is always on the attack. He is always either on reconnaissance. He's out in danger. The purpose of cavalry is not to hold land. You let the schlubs who walk in the mud do that, right? There's something dangerous and beautiful and attractive about cavalry, and that's that same energy that he brings to his life as a soldier, he of course brings into the domestic life he's trying to build with Anna, but it's not meant to be. And one almost feels like, oh, well, thank God that he didn't marry Kitty, because that would have just ruined her.
Yeah. And it did ruin Anna. So yeah, there's just sorry for that segue, but there really are no villains in a Tolstoy novel.
No, not even Napoleon in War and Peace is a villain.
But again, I guess to talk a little bit more about Levin, it's such a tragedy that this character has kind of been erased from people's knowledge about this book. And it's funny, like, you could, I hate adaptations, so I offer this more as a way of maybe kind of trying to communicate the valence for this book to, like, to our guys now. But you can almost picture, like, this is cheesy, Hudson, forgive me, but like, if somebody was to rewrite Anna Karenina, or use some of these same kind of obvious allusions to it in the same way that Infinite Jest does Brothers Karamazov. You might
Right.
have a story about like a young millennial woman who like goes off to like a small liberal arts college and falls down the succumbs to the IQ shredder of being a career woman, or used by men but never married. Just kind of you can kind of picture a tragic millennial careerist woman in the same way that you could kind of picture Anna and her eventual fate. And then you could have a character like who went to her same high school, but like didn't just decided not to go to college and like picked up a trade, or like decided he was going to actually like run his dad's farm or small business. You could somebody that stays at home and marries a girl a year behind him in high school. And you could kind of envision the life that this man is experiencing and going off in this completely different trajectory than somebody like Anna is going, as she gets kind of crushed by the world. But like that could be like, why doesn't Jonathan Franzen write that book?
Well, because he's
like,
a hack.
that would be a good book.
No, but to kind of to play along with your suggestion, right? I think you'd actually have to gender swap the protagonists. I think that you would need the Anna Karenina figure to be a male, and you would need the Levin figure to be a woman, specifically to make the sort of social commentary that you're trying to with this, right? If you're adapting it, let's say, for modern audiences, right? Because you've got Levin, who's supposed to be kind of a playboy. He's supposed to be seen in Russian society. He's supposed to be kind of caddish, right? He's supposed to be involved, right? And you have Anna, who is supposed to be this paramount good wife, this good woman, right? And that's just not the it would come off as fake and kind of gay if you tried to have Anna Karenina uphold her virtue in, like, say, a city like New York.
Right.
It would be expected of her actually to be kind of a hoe.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
So I think it could, and you could have them be even families who work in the foreign service in Washington D.C. and they all go to NYU.
There you go.
I'm never gonna write this, but I could write it, kind of thing.
Yeah. I've been surprised that nobody has tried to kind of revisit the structure of Anna Karenina, but place it in a the 20th century.
I'm gonna jot notes about this until it actually comes out. I'm gonna blame you.
Sweet.
And it's gonna be
dedicate the book to me.
Yeah, and then the first reviews would be like, why don't you just read Anna Karenina?
So we have to, Hudson, we have to talk about the first line.
Yes.
And
definitely.
This is one of the most famous, probably the most famous first lines in all of literature. And their translations vary, but I've got my copy of the book right in front of me, so I'll just read this for everybody. All happy families resemble one another, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. I've also heard that written, all happy families are alike and all unhappy families are different in their own unique way.
Right.
And I mean, this is remarkable for a number of reasons. One, I would just call people's attention back to this this notion of pronomian and antinomian. And it's funny because when I first read this in college, Hudson, I was in a 19th century lit class in this ultra liberal college, and I could tell. In hindsight, I realized that my professor was probably one of a handful of like conservative professors that had yet to retire or yet kind of
He's liberal. He's liberal in name only, if
yeah,
only for
yeah.
reputation's sake.
And I never would have picked up on it. I didn't at all at the time. It's only now, as a middle-aged guy, I revisit some of the things he said to me. And one of the things he said, speaking to a class filled with liberal arts students, he said, like, what a radical statement. What a extreme radical statement to say that sameness is good and difference is bad. Because I think he was trying to say, he's trying to like, smash our head against the wall and basically say, doesn't this go against every damn thing that
that
you
you've
like,
been
young,
taught so
childish,
far.
snowflake libs have been taught so far and believe earnestly, but he couldn't say that. So he had to just plant that seed of that he had to throw that pebble in my shoe that I only felt like 20 years later and was like, like,
so one more interpretation of that you could say is we don't see any happy families in this novel.
That's true.
And
I mean, yeah.
And so it's almost like Tolstoy's kind of one family kind of gets happy at the end, right? Which we'll get to. I mean, we're already an hour in, and we said that we'd only need an hour and a half, and I don't.
Maybe I was way off.
I was like, we were talking beforehand, and I was like, with all the digressions and sidebars, there's no way. But I'm gonna let him think that we can do this, just so I can have him back. But there are no happy families in Anna Karenina, and they're all very different. And when I first read that and outside of the context of the novel, right, I almost saw it as like, okay, this is a thesis statement. Let's see where he goes with this. And I almost didn't get the connection right away. I was like, this is kind of a non sequitur almost, like, because we get that sentence and then we're introduced to Anna's brother and his drama, right? And I was like, oh, is this Anna Karenina's husband? Because again, I knew the bare bones of this novel, right? I knew every happy family is the same, every unhappy family is unhappy in their own different special way, right? I knew about trains, and I knew about Anna's demise, and I knew about the affair, right? That's all I knew, right? So I'm reading about this unhappy family right away, and I'm like, okay, clearly this is, but the thing that got me is that Anna comes in like a superhero. She comes from a happy family, right? And she is there to make an unhappy family whole and happy again. And then of course we get the rest of the book. I'm almost like, okay, I'll just read this one chapter and then everything will be happily ever after and I can put it down and all these families are happy again and they're all the same. But of course that's not how literature works. But yeah, it's such a good and deep line, and it really does stay with you.
It does, and yeah, it's always stuck with me. I mean, I don't know, we may disagree about it a little bit, Hudson, in that I guess it is more alluded to, and it's probably, I don't think any of us can have the naive faith that Levin and Kitty's lives are going to be, a fairy tale, and there is this description of Levin's occasional bouts of depression and suicidal ideation, but you sort of hope that it's alluded to that Kitty and Levin will, through their family, be creating some sort of wholesome, worthy house.
Friend of the show.
Yeah.
I
don't think that we get shown a happy family directly, but there is
No.
maybe this oblique nod to the fact that perhaps that's at least a direction that Levin is going to move in. And I guess what I'm saying is I do like some people argue that this one sentence is this microcosm for the entire book. It's this strange,
Right.
like, he it's like the Big Bang. Like, it starts out as this one sentence, and then the book just unfurls to make this point, and it gets broader and broader. It's like a rose petal opening or
He's
something.
showing his work.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, okay, I gave you this bombshell. I'm going to show you what that means now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, okay, I wanted to ask, well, okay, so yes, Kitty and Levin's family could very well be happy, but if we think about it in context of what happens later in Russia and the social changes that occur later, it's a fleeting happiness because more than likely the Levin family is destroyed by communism.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, we could say that at best Levin's son, right, maybe escapes with Wrangel,
Mm.
and gets to live the aristocratic lifestyle in England, and sort of becomes a man without a country.
Right.
But more than likely, just shot and dead.
Yeah.
It's
No, it's
this
true.
this novel is so prescient. It's actually insane. The Russians. I could do just a whole episode on just Russian literature, and I think that'd be interesting.
Mm.
Uh,
No, it's true. It's hard not to consider that upon finishing the novel.
so, part two. Do you want to go to the second part of the novel?
We can keep going, Hudson. I'm fine.
No, I meant part two of the novel.
Yeah.
Because it's broken up into what, like,
Yeah.
eight parts, I think. And I
Yeah.
feel like we covered maybe the first. So yeah, Kitty is sick. She's literally so heartbroken that she gets an illness, right? Uh, Vronsky and Vronsky's still trying to woo Anna, and I think they actually do begin an affair, right?
Mm.
Or at least they're so Anna is spending time with one of her more wealthy, influential friends in St. Petersburg, just as a cover for her liaisons with Vronsky, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like it's a fire that she know will burn her, but she's too attracted to the warmth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like she knows this thing is bad for her. She knows that she's not supposed to, but her antinomian tendencies, to borrow your phrasing, right?
Mm.
Because I'm learning words now. Her antinomian tendencies are just overpowering any sense of judgment and morality that she has thus far displayed throughout the novel.
Mm-hmm.
It like Tolstoy has done such a good job of setting her up as an honorable person, right? As a paragon of womanly Russian virtue, right? That the fact that this has happened means something. It's not just a fling. It's not just a young woman's sort of flight of fancy. No, she's really messing up here,
Yeah.
and she's down bad for this guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And very clearly undone by it. Yeah, it's it's funny. I guess it's a hard book to summarize, Hudson, because I'm not sure, like, a lot of the micro details end up mattering that much. I think sometimes it's a book a little bit like Moby Dick, like not all that much happens.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds like it's going to be very exciting with this affair, but it's a lot of Anna and Levin kind of sitting around and contemplating their existence.
It's a lot of talking in parlors and a
lot
lot
of
of
parlor rooms.
in double entendre, a lot of sort of well, not double entendre, but there's a lot of allusion to what's going on without actually saying it, you know? And there's a lot of rumor and scandal and sort of this, like, women gossiping in circles, right? And Anna used to be part of these circles, and then she finds herself on the outside. Yeah, it's. I did want to talk about Anna and her husband, right? Karenin.
Sure.
He's just such a bore, and not like he's a pig, but he's just so boring. He's an older guy. They have one son together, Sergey. Also, I think his nickname is Seroja, right? Who she's a devoted, wonderful mother to. Uh, Again, this paragon of womanly Russian virtue, right? She's a good mother. She tries to keep a good home for her diplomat husband, who is someone of importance, but just like they just can't. They're just so different. It's clear that it was kind of a bad match.
Yeah.
The traditional Russian courting system, right? Of because one of the things that's also big in the novel too is the social change of women picking their own husbands comes up as like a possibility.
Yes.
And you have the older people, right, who are like, no, this is a terrible idea. What do young people know about love? What do they know about a successful marriage? What do they know about anything except anything past their own short lives? Whereas the young people are like, we don't know each other. We would rather marry for love, whatever that means, than for duty. And that's, Anna exemplifies both in that she married for duty and was unhappy, but she also she falls into this love affair. She tries to get a divorce. She tries to do it the quote unquote right way, but her husband is stubborn and won't give it to her. And he's still sort of like, he's so steady and so boring that he's just like, I'll let you have your fling, but you're going to come back and it's going to be fine. He always holds out hope that they're going to end up back together. Which is, like, dude, just, I don't know. It's hard for me as a modern to conceptualize that.
And he's he I think there's a lot of descriptions of how he kind of falls into mysticism. It's kind of a coping mechanism for
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it described as this like that kind of standard marriage within aristocracies, as everybody marries twice and once for love, and it's this kind of tragic cyclical thing that happens with a lot of aristocratic marriages where when you're the old person, you marry a young person that you're probably in love with and infatuated with, probably because they remind you of the 20-year-old that you weren't allowed to marry when you had to marry the like 65-year-old duchess whose estate you would inherit, and then you could marry for love. So there was never it was never one-to-one love marrying love, but you had to it was staggered generationally. So it was always unrequited.
There's this one painting, I'll have to look it up, of it's a painting of a wedding, right? And it's clear like this old man as the groom and this young beautiful woman as the bride, and she is just weeping, right? And everybody in the room is uncomfortable at this marriage. It's a really beautiful piece, and I have to look it up. I'll find it, but that's neither here nor there, and I don't want to create dead air, but just to like, there's something tragic about this. I mean, people are talking about how 30-year-old men shouldn't be dating 19-year-olds or whatever, and I don't really care about that. But there is something not evil, but something tragic about a young woman not getting to be with a young man, right? And having to be with this sort of old the pairing of an extremely old and young woman, extremely old man and young woman is a tragic pairing in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, I do think that Tolstoy gives Karenin some moments of um, empathy, just like he does for Vronsky or any of his characters. I'm trying to recall the scene. You might have to correct me if I'm getting bits wrong, Hudson, but I think both Karenin and Vronsky are there when Anna is giving birth to her daughter. Eventually, her and Vronsky have a child, and she is, I think, demanding that while she's in labor, I think demanding Vronsky and Karenin shake hands or like make some sort of amends. And that a lot of that is, I think, you provided Karenin's perspective in that a lot, and you see again just another side of somebody's humanity who, as you said, I mean, he is kind of a dull old man, unworthy of his wife. But it's not Tolstoy. I don't think is any more condescending to him than he is Vronsky or really any other kind of secondary character in the book.
So I found the painting, and you're gonna laugh. It's called "Unequal Marriage" by Vasily Pirkarev, right? And it was actually done in St. Petersburg in 1862. So very much around this time of this novel.
Oh man, there you go.
I'll post it when I post this episode. So that's just very interesting. I don't know. I feel like we can kind of, because we're coming up at hour and 15, right? You're right that going through a whole plot summary would kind of be tedious, right? But the major plot points I'd say are Anna is pregnant by Vronsky. She does have a baby, right? Actually, the idea that Anna is pregnant actually kind of totally messes up Vronsky in his own life, as described by, because he's an expert horseman, right? And he like falls in a race because she kind of drops this bomb on him, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, so they run off to Italy, right? And they become expats because they're basically chased out of St. Petersburg, you know. Uh, and please stop me if there's anything you want to discuss about that, or if I'm missing anything. But
No, I mean the one thing that popped into my head, Hudson, was I think I recall them just the description of like Anna's attitude towards her daughter, and she's noticing that she just doesn't feel the same love for the daughter that she has for her son with Karenin.
right,
There's this um there's this kind of indifference and this sense that there's this another like quote from Anna that has always stuck with me. Is at one point she's talking to like one of her few friends she has left, and she says to her like, Vronsky is only a lover of women to me, kind of explaining how her being the mother to his child or him being the father to the child, it's like it's anathema to them. It's the
right,
child is something that has gotten in the way of the two of them uh,
yes,
imbibing one another in this one-dimensional frame of
yes. This
lovers.
was this is lust. This is an affair. This is purely physical between them. Well, not purely physical, because there is like tender moments, right? There is like eros and attraction, and it's and other expressions of love that aren't just physical. But there's not supposed to be any this is a terrible. There's not supposed to be any baggage with it. This is supposed
Right.
to be fun. This is Anna's chance to have fun, right? And she almost resents her newborn daughter for bringing reality to her, right? Because this was at a time when women still had to live in reality. All right, that'll be my only insult point
Yeah.
throughout the stream. I can't believe I lasted that long. But her daughter is a reminder that there are consequences for her actions, that she has to be more than a runaway socialite who had this romantic affair. That there's consequences to her actions, I think is and in her, I'm going to use the word again, in her antinomian sort of lifestyle that she falls into. Yeah, the baby is anathema. It's horrible. It's this woman, Anna Karenina, that I held in such esteem at the beginning of the book. Tolstoy does a really good job of making me pity her, not even hate, but pity her and what she
Yeah.
becomes.
Yeah, exactly. There's never any hatred. There is just this kind of pity for everyone's circumstances in the book. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Why do you said at the beginning, Hudson, that you just found and I asked this question because I feel the same way, but like you feel Levin more fascinating. And I'm just curious as to if you can try to characterize as to why, because as we've said, both portraits are utterly sympathetic,
Mm-hmm.
and one might assume that reading about Anna, the most beautiful woman in Moscow, might be more titillating than reading about Levin. But I too, part of what drives me nuts about Anna kind of overshadowing him isn't just what it does to the narrative as a whole, but like there is something that's more fascinating to me about
Okay,
Levin. Like I was always
let's
much more excited to get to the chapters with Levin, even though
right.
he's doing nothing but like hunting pheasant and like figuring out what kind of hay his like cattle
Yeah,
need.
yeah. It's like how
But
can
like
I
you
best
want to
run
get
my
back to
estate?
him
It's
and
like,
out
yeah.
of the courtrooms or
Okay.
the courtly affairs.
I, okay, I have several things I want to say about that, right? One, that is just pure Tolstoy right there, right? Because War and Peace is the same way. You have the scenes of the war, and you have the scenes of Russian society, and it's like, the little girls like to see the balls, and they like to see the ornate dress up, and they like to see the intrigue and the women talking about men and stuff like that, and the boys like the battles. So you have girl. I really think it's just, I'm a guy, so I like to
Hmm.
see how this guy runs his farm. But then on a deeper level, I see myself in Levin very much so.
Hmm.
I have pined after a woman and it didn't work out. I've got married. Like I'm a married man right now. Shocker, right? But uh, I have also had thoughts of, because it's not perfect right away with Levin and Kitty.
Hmm.
When he becomes a husband, he starts to lament his bachelorhood a little bit. He's like, "Oh well, I used to get to do all these things. I used to have free time to pursue my hobbies on the farm, and all I had to do was worry about that. Now I have to be a husband." And she's always here, and she's always talking. Like he goes right into like, "Hey guys, my wife." So that's
Yeah.
that's that's very relatable even back then. Um, so what we'll do right now, to get into Levin more, because he is more interesting to me. Let's end with Anna. Anna jumps in front of a train
Hmm.
at the end of her story, to sort of tie up the train and the modernity bad narrative, right? Anna is so overcome with grief because Vronsky, again, he starts pursuing another woman. or at least it's rumored that he is. Like, she has her suspicions. She's so isolated from everybody that loves her, and it's only this affair that she has left, that as soon as he thinks, or as soon as she thinks that he's his eye is wandering, which definitely is, right, just given his character.
Hmm.
uh, she's overcome with this guilt, and she ends her life, and that's the end of this tragic tale for her. uh yeah, just horrible,
Yeah. Yeah.
like beautiful and horrible and tragic. And Vronsky, in his guilt, volunteers to go off to a war. Like, he does what he retreats into the soldiers that he loves. So the daughter is just completely left alone, almost. Like, she has no
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
um
this description too. I think like the last thing we get of Vronsky is like as he's heading off to this very very doomed war. Like he feels like he has a toothache. Like he just suddenly feels the decay of his body. It's like this alluding to his death, but I think it's also just him coming back down into reality of like, oh, I'm back down from the clouds now. And he certainly seems resigned to die. And you just sort of that's the final description of him is his tooth was hurting.
so and I'm sorry, I've got like 10 minutes, so
Oh
let's
yeah,
let's take the next 10, and we'll talk about Levin, and then I think we'll call it a show. Yeah.
sounds good.
So yeah, Levin. And it's funny because Levin gets married to Kitty, and he tries very hard to keep her in social life at first. Um he's not enamored with having a wife, and it's not until they visit his sick brother that he really truly falls in love with her.
Mm,
Because she shows him just how soft and just how wonderful of a caretaker she is. Because his brother is like a drunk. I think he's married to a prostitute. He's boorish and kind of ugly and horrible. But she shows him. Kitty shows. I think his name is Nikolai, right? She
yes.
shows him so much love and compassion that Levin feels an immense amount of guilt. Can I
Mm.
actually pause real quick? Sorry.
Oh yeah.
So there's also a really funny part in the book, right? Nikolai is dead. They think he's dead, right? And because he's like boorish, right? He's like, "I'm not dead yet," and like he kind of shouts it out, and it even, I think it shocks Levin a little bit, and then he dies shortly thereafter. It's there's it's one of the small moments of levity in this novel. Uh, One of the things that I think is infinitely attractive about Levin, and I think because you and I are, I think, are on very similar paths when it comes to faith, right? I know you did a stream with Jay Burden. You and I have DM'd about it. I'm only recently coming back to Christianity myself. I know it's
Mm,
something that you're kind of flirting with.
yeah.
And Levin himself is wrestling with the idea of God and the idea of a Christian God specifically, right? Which very much reflects Tolstoy's own um, path to redemption, let's say.
Yes.
Did you ever read The Confession?
I have not. That'll be one I'll get done before the retirement home.
Yes, that's. I think you get a better understanding of Levin by reading that. And this is written kind of later, like towards the end of Tolstoy's life, but you could almost see it as Levin writing it, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Sure.
Uh, I won't go into it if you haven't read it, but it's definitely mandatory Tolstoy reading. Uh, yeah, so I wanted to get your thoughts about. It's funny. I started this podcast about literature, and somehow I always end up talking about Jesus. So, do you kind of see? Am I? I don't know. Am I on the right track here, or?
uh, in terms of Levin as
Well,
somebody
even
who's
why we're interested in this book, you and I, and what we're kind of seeing here.
yeah, maybe so. I think it's probably I think I haven't reread it since I gained this kind of fascination with Christianity. And so I think it warrants a reread with that new lens. I think, I mean, and not to change the subject, still circulating around Levin here, Hudson, and this is probably getting too doxy, but I think it's worth it because maybe it'll help us get to Levin's character. But I named my son Levin,
Oh.
and it's very strange because I had this thought when I read Anna Karenina for the first time in college, and this voice just said to me, "If I ever have a son, I'm going to name him Levin after the character in this book, the Tolstoy proxy." And at the time, I was, a cynical, 21-year-old college student who was probably like, I'm never going to have kids. I'm not going to sell out. But something about and not to be both cliche and grim, but I think part of it was if I die and my wife or my surviving family explains to my son why he was given this name, and he picks up this book and he reads about Levin, and he takes this as a kind of mimetic hero, I think that he will be able to navigate his way in the world.
Mm.
Uh, and I think part of why I say that isn't even so much that he's the greatest, like he's a great man, and I want you to model his heroic story. But I do think you get with him a man in full.
He's a
You get
good
him.
man.
He's a good man, and you get him like he doesn't get the girl, and then he gets the girl, and then he struggles with fatherhood. He struggles with young adulthood. He struggles with parenthood. But it is this very, very full picture of, as you said, Hudson, a good man, and like a believable, very, very real good man.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think that's part of why this is my favorite book and why it has such a deep connection to me. I felt at least that this is the only character that I've ever had the impulse to name a family member, name a child after. And just so the listeners aren't afraid, my daughter is not named Anna. So didn't do that. That'd be dark.
I almost want to end it there because that's a beautiful sentiment.
Yeah, no, I know you probably can't top it. I don't blame you.
No, I definitely
Pretty
can't.
good.
That's great, and it's funny because his name is Levin, and Leo, like another way of saying Leo in Russian is Lev.
Yeah.
So that, but yeah, no, that's great. Last things, where can people find you? How can they support you? How can they hear more of your stuff?
Oh yeah, totally. Well, if you just punch Last Things into YouTube, pretty much all of my stuff is there. I do have a Substack, and I am Last Things 4 on Twitter. I had to kill the first 3. So yeah, that's where you can find me. And as Hudson mentioned, he was one of 40 guests for the last Picture Show Film Festival. That's available on Gumroad. Hudson reviewed The Searchers, which is one of the fantastic the one of several fantastic westerns that got reviewed in the festival. So people should check that out.
And if you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you, dear listener. We can't do this without you. And if you really like the Double Dealer, you can buy one of our magazines. Issue 11 is out right now. Issue 12 will be out in the spring. You can become a member of our Substack community. I think it's like $8 a month if that's something that you guys are into. All the content on the Substack is free right now, so it would be because of your generosity that you would be donating to us in order to help pay writers and artists who contribute to the magazine. I'm terrible at shilling. I don't know how to end podcasts, so until I've come up with a better ending, I'm just going to end it like this.
End it with read Anna Karenina.
Yes, yes. Go read Anna Karenina. If we our waxing lovingly about this book should convince you to read it, and
put
really
down your shonen manga for like a week.
Yeah.
Read Anna Karenina.
Reject weeaboo, embrace Russia boo.
That's right.
All right, goodbye.
That's a great title for this episode.
Yeah, yeah.